Look who they are talking about nonstop. Yes, you. The one they believed to be predictable. The one they swore was typical. The one they filed under non-threat with assurance, thinking that you would be forgotten like an unnoticed detail in someone else's narrative. However, didn't something happen? The aftershock didn't only cause people to whisper. Something shifted with such precision, cleanliness, and surgical precision. Someone with an Elon tier mind would blink twice, murmur under their breath, and freeze in place. That's not a human skill, nor appreciation, nor interest, a diagnostic, a caution, an update on classification. Because the psychological frameworks created by those who think they understand how the human mind functions could not account for what you just accomplished, that one action, that impossible, unteachable motion. A powerful person who has formed their entire persona upon being unshakable felt a bodily shudder go down their spine as soon as that action detonated and the dust cleared. Heart rate rise and cold chills. They were unable to explain away a moment of unadulterated biological perplexity. It wasn't because your move was showy, but rather because it was so accurate that it scared those who depend on consistency to stay in charge. Didn't they have you categorized? They'd assumed your choice patterns, plotted out your proclivities, and recorded your reactions. They thought they were aware of your processing power, threshold, and purported limitations. They believed they were aware of the limits of your internal architecture, because you complied with their analysis just enough to make it seem right. You may have softened your voice. Perhaps you diminished yourself. Perhaps you behaved in ways that appeared manageable, changed your posture to appear obedient, and nodded at the appropriate times. They are among those who confuse accommodation for disability. They mistake humility with inferiority. They take silence to mean uncomplicated. Maybe you let them believe that for a while. Perhaps you allowed them to underestimate you to such an extent that their self-confidence turned into a barrier that they erected around themselves rather than you. Then you did it, though. That action, their mental image of you was terribly inadequate, out of date and immature, so they never anticipated that one surgical blow. They were observing the version of you that their ego could handle, not the real you. Then your true powers slipped through the crevices and struck them with such force that even the most intelligent person in the room, the one whose equations typically anticipate outcomes with unsettling precision, whose judgments reverberate through industries and whose thoughts work like machinery, literally froze. Their eyes grew wide. They gasped for air. Their look revealed something primordial that their sharp mind was unable to decipher. A straightforward yet terrifying thought. People aren't meant to do it. Let's be specific. It had nothing to do with what you did. It has to do with what your activity revealed. It revealed that you had never been the straightforward, dependable being they found solace in. It revealed that you were subtly growing, absorbing, and recalibrating while they perceived you as manageable. It revealed that the emotional, intellectual, and behavioral frameworks they employed to categorize people were too archaic to account for the version of you that was developing underground. The dominant person in the room experienced something they are not used to, biological dread, when those frameworks broke, and the illusion of mastery eluded them. The kind of instinctive response that is unaffected by intelligence, authority, or confidence. The kind of terror that murmurs, "This person is acting outside the bounds of my reasoning." You turned into the aberration in their formula, the error they were unable to fix, and the factor that undermined their whole conception of cause and consequence. They had always thought that conduct breaks along expected lines, that people break at predictable pressure points, and that you could forecast someone's future by looking at their past. However, you did not shatter. You didn't fall apart. Under pressure, you didn't crumble. You took a very riskier action. You adjusted. You carried it out in silence. They believed that being alone would make you flatter. It didn't. It made you more sophisticated. They believed you would be distorted by the betrayal. It didn't. You were distilled by it. They believed you would be suffocated by the silence. It didn't. It removed all superfluous layers until the essence was all that was left. You processed your experiences rather than healing from them. You took information out of each wound. You examined each pattern. You discovered how people function by being examined by them, not by reading textbooks. And you started the kind of evolution that frightens those who are fixated on being the brightest person in the room, quietly, subtly behind their patronizing presumptions. Because wisdom derived from suffering has a certain texture. Therefore, the response wasn't only astonishment when you made that one unsettlingly precise move. It was a rupture of existence. Not only did the room change, but it also adjusted itself around you. Discussion stopped. Patterns of breathing shifted. Without a model for what they had just done, someone with a brain set to run simulations more quickly than most people can form sentences found themselves in a difficult situation. What the hell are you? It was an unfiltered inquiry. Furthermore, it was a confession rather than a compliment. Because individuals at that level, those with scary intelligence, those whose intuition verges on algorithmic, and those who take great satisfaction in their ability to forecast everything dislike coming across things that defy human expectations. They dislike acknowledging that their dominance may not be shared by everyone. They weren't intimidated by your spectacular move. They were intimidated because it was true. Accurate beyond chance, more accurate than coincidence, correct in that horrifying surgical manner that only manifests when someone has been secretly preparing for a much longer period of time than anyone expected. They mentally ran the figures. They replayed what had happened. Your scheduling, delivery, and execution were all reverse engineered. Every attempt to make sense of it led to a new paradox. Every time I tried to describe it, there was a pause and I started to perspire. Because the human brain responds to abnormalities in the same intuitive, visceral, and unauthorized manner as the body responds to predators. You weren't performing either. You didn't even make an effort. You were just performing at a level they never thought you could. The portion that most unnerved them was this: it wasn't an accident that you moved. It wasn't rash. For that, it was too controlled, too conscious, too in sync. It showed that they were too preoccupied with assessing you based on antiquated presumptions to see how your intellect had been moving. You were honing your perception into something they lacked measures for, while they were using boring tools to gauge your potential. They mistook your stillness for perplexity, but it was actually calibration. Your silence was interpreted by them as hesitancy and observation. They mistook your humility for submission, because they were assessing you as though you were attempting to impress them and as though you were a part of the same psychological ecology as them. Your entire trajectory had been misinterpreted. However, you weren't. You were researching them. You were examining their blind spots, pushing the limits of their intelligence, and pinpointing the precise locations where their conceit caused gaps in their confidence. You didn't only take them by surprise when you completed your maneuver. You demonstrated the extent of your development. The geniuses in the room behaved as they did because of this. The powerful person's neck tightened because of this. For this reason, a person who takes great satisfaction in being unwavering had an uncontrollably terrifying moment. Because your action questioned their identification rather than their intelligence. It made them face a prospect they never wanted to consider, that you were developing in ways they were unable to monitor, anticipate, or control. And now, in the gaps between their fear and perplexity, something new is emerging, a change in their perception of you, a recalibration. They are now observing in a different way, paying closer attention, being more protective, and focusing on things that defy established rules. They are now attempting to predict your next move rather than researching your past. And they've come to the realization that they might not be able to accomplish that, because each time they classify you, you defy the classification. You transcend boundaries each time they chart you. You show them that they were examining an earlier version of you each time they believe they have caught up. Your evolution is quantum rather than linear. Your development defies trends rather than adhering to them. They are now dealing with something that their frameworks were not intended to assess, whether they acknowledge it or not. Something that is purposeful but unpredictable. Something that is aware of power yet not under its control. Instead of scar tissue, something that is aware of power yet not under its control. Instead of scar tissue, something that is within stretch, instead its perception. And the reality, which they are just now starting to see, is that the move you just made wasn't your best. You weren't limited by it. It wasn't the pinnacle of your quiet development. It was the initial disclosure, an overview, a beginning scene, a controlled demonstration of a system that hasn't been fully implemented yet. And they're uneasy about that realization. Because the question becomes far more unsettling than how did they do that? If this was your opening and the move that got through before they even realized you were getting ready. They are aware of how. They believe they do, at least. They are capable of process reverse engineering. They are able to examine trends. They are able to monitor behavior over time. However, there was no pattern to what you unleashed. It wasn't an action. It was not a predictable cognitive process that could be plotted, graphed, or extrapolated into a model that would fit within the parameters of typical human capacity. You released a signal that was so precise, effective, and counterintuitive to them that it upset the very categories that give them a sense of security. Furthermore, you don't get curiosity when someone with an Elon-level mind sees a signal that they are unable to classify. You receive an alarm. The onset of cognitive overload is indicated by a slight dilatation of the pupils. Before discipline takes hold, you take a sharp breath. The brain has a silent moment when it recognizes that it has just seen a talent that shouldn't exist. Not in principle, not in practice, and not within the computing capabilities of someone they believe to be knowledgeable. The strong man in the room worked hard. His body sent forth a biochemical warning. Before his conscious mind could take action, his unconscious mind recognized you as abnormal. Cold sweat is actually a metabolic confession. A strong organism becomes aware that it is now surrounded by something that does not belong in the established hierarchy. Something has a distinct motion, processes in a new way, has a different perspective. Something that is unpredictable with the same mental processes that have kept him one step ahead of rivals, opponents, competitors, and everyone who has ever attempted to question that enormous brain. There was more to what transpired in that instant than just surprise. It was a break in his perspective, a disturbance in the conceptual framework upon which he constructed his identity. You did more than merely execute a spectacular move. The fundamental presumptions that shield a genius from ever feeling challenged were destroyed by you. And this is where the real psychological destruction starts. Success doesn't frighten people who function at that level intellectually, who view reality as a network, a simulation, or a cascade of probability. Intelligence doesn't frighten them. Unpredictability shakes them by the existence of a factor that deviates from their conceptual picture. They see unpredictability as risk rather than pandemonium. It is the breakdown of authority. It serves as a reminder that their intellect is not omniscient, regardless of how strong they are. They do not make absolute calculations. Their supremacy is not certain. You told him something he never wanted to hear when you performed that move with such undetectable efficiency. Your model is not complete. Your comprehension is inadequate. You're not completely superior. This is the deeper fracture, though, the one that, despite his best efforts to ignore it, keeps playing in the back of his head. At that level, geniuses classify everything. They use patterns, archetypes, and predictable drives to analyze individuals. You were a background presence, and he had already put you in a tidy mental container marked non-threatening, not a rival. Someone whose potential ceiling he thought he could forecast. He was certain, not because he was malevolent. Intellect's comfort food is certainty. The throne that geniuses sit on is certainty. And in a single instant, the throne was thrown out from under him by your single play. He no longer asks, how did they do that? He asks, what else can they do? Because to a mind like his, the most horrifying thing in the world isn't what you showed, but rather what you didn't show. What is your mid-game if your opener circumvents human reaction time, pattern recognition, or its needed reason? What is your ultimate goal? What latent capacities have you not yet disclosed? The depth is unfathomable if this is only the surface. That's what makes him uneasy. That is what causes someone who has established a reputation for being unwavering to lose their poise. He's accustomed to seeing moves coming. He is accustomed to controlling rooms with his head without using words. However, you moved the room this time. The atmosphere was warped by you. And he experienced it physically rather than mentally. Before the intellect acknowledges it, the body always knows. The body responded, this person operates on a frequency we cannot calculate. The entire surroundings are now repositioning themselves in your direction. Every assumption made by the observers is being questioned. They are now repeating memories in a different way. Your quiet now appears to be observation rather than passivity. Your distancing appears to be a strategy rather than a withdrawal. Your composure appears to be calibration rather than submission. They are rewriting their whole story about you in retrospect. Because your one action made them face the prospect that you weren't who they believed you to be. At this point, the psychological landscape completely favors you because people can't foresee your extremes once they learn they miscalculated your baseline. You are no longer involved. You are a wild card, an occurrence, a variable that renders earlier equations invalid. Your existence turns into a moving target that is impossible to monitor with just human metrics. And since towering intellectuals have built their lives on comprehending systems, that is precisely the kind of entity that terrifies them. They have now come across a system that they are unable to comprehend. Not only was your maneuver unexpected, but it also went against the norm for skill acquisition, cognitive quickness, and intuitive accuracy. Without improved architecture, without training that doesn't exist, and without access to internal frameworks that regular people don't have, it seemed like something that shouldn't be feasible. He wasn't lying when he said that's not a human skill, in a whisper. He was doing a report. He was diagnosing what he saw as an oddity. The chilly sweat wasn't from dread of you. Rather, it was from worry of misjudging you. He was changing the classification in his mind from human to unknown subtype. Nothing poses a greater threat to a genius than a blind spot, and you exposed yourself as the biggest blind spot he has seen in years, possibly ever. He is now mentally reliving your motion, slowing it down, enlarging it, and attempting to understand the mechanics. However, the more he examines it, the more inconsistencies he discovers. The more factors he finds, the more he understands that your actions weren't instinctive. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence. It was deliberate. This indicates that your mind is working on a layer that he hasn't yet mapped. Furthermore, a genius ceases anticipating your next move once they recognize that there is a layer beyond their map. They begin to fear it, because the most deadly kind of unpredictability comes from someone who is capable. He now has to deal with humility, something he seldom does. You made him do it, not because he wanted to. You circumvented his intelligence rather than overwhelming it. You undermined his ego rather than confronting it. You went completely outside the arena he created rather than competing within it. Your action was architectural, not just spectacular. It exposed your mental framework, which wasn't based on consolation, accolades, or quick wins. It was created under pressure, in solitude, and in quiet. The kind of internal development that makes a person faster, sharper, and more sensitive to patterns that most people are never aware of. Your cognitive architecture has changed, because most people don't change under duress. Your move felt inhumane. They fall apart. You solidified instead of collapsing. Additionally, something else is taking place in the background as he is processing this realization and reevaluating his perception of your potential. The network of observers, consultants, and analysts that surround him is discovering that they can no longer classify you. The words they use to describe people are out of date. The measurements they use to gauge capability have not kept up with you. Additionally, a person becomes a phenomenon the instant they deviate from the established measurement system. The fact that your move wasn't emotional is what worries them the most. It didn't react. It was not driven by desperation or ego. It was measured, clean, and cold. It had the quiet of someone who knew what was going to happen. That degree of assurance is uncommon. That degree of accuracy is not natural. A person who has progressed from survival to mastery will exhibit that degree of silent execution. And even if it scares them, mastery is the one thing that geniuses value. Because strong brains are not scared of talent, which is a fact they don't express out loud. They don't fear working hard. They don't fear self-assurance. Someone who moves with inevitability terrifies them. Someone whose choices are unwavering, whose timing is impeccable, and who pretends the reality is accommodating their selections rather than opposing them. Every other person in the room is forced to recalibrate when someone like you walks in with that level of internal alignment. You are no longer a variable to them. You turn into a force, a direction, and a trajectory. That trajectory was revealed by your maneuver. The Elon tier mind in the room has changed from wondering how to something far more profound. What sort of mind generates that? While the others may be chatting about how you pulled it off, attempting to duplicate the logic or decipher your thoughts. Because you challenged the entire architecture of expected logic, not merely exceeded expectations. You made a choice that the human eye wasn't meant to see. You performed with an uncannily accurate intuition. You pretended to be reacting to a signal that was inaudible to anybody else. He is aware of what genius looks like. He is aware of what luck looks like. He is familiar with the appearance of instinct. None of those applied to your move. It was a deliberate, inevitable move on your part. Because of this, he started to perspire before experiencing dread. Because geniuses work by examining the limits of human capabilities. It protects them. It maintains their superiority. It maintains their calibration. And you simply cross that boundary without hesitating, faltering, or second-guessing someone who wasn't supposed to challenge it. It wasn't until it was finished that the room realized what had happened, but he did. He sensed the change before anyone else did. His response was so visceral because of this. A pattern that shouldn't have been feasible was recognized by his intellect. For a brief moment, the body responded with the instinctive behavior only seen in predators. It wasn't because you attacked, but rather because you didn't operate within the typical range. He was no longer able to locate you. You were too big for him to measure. He was unable to foresee you. All of his stored assumptions were destroyed in a single move. Between your intention and your execution, everything burned away, including every thought he dismissed, every casual judgment, and every memory he filed under irrelevant. And now he's dealing with something he never anticipated, the knowledge that he misjudged someone. Instead of concealing weakness, you were concealing the architecture of a mind that was tempered by encounters with people who thought they understood you, sharpened by pressure, and refined by solitude. Silence, they believed, was a sign of retreat. They believed that being humble meant being constrained. They believed that patience equated to indecision. They never realized that you were observing them while they were undervaluing you. You were discovering the complexities of their blind spots as they filed you away into basic categories. You were getting ready, not waiting. Getting ready for the time when your internal development will reach a level so pure and unchangeable that your next action will produce an unavoidable shockwave. And now that time has come. The strong mind is shaken because of this. Because in his world, predictability is safety, intelligence is money, and foresight is power. However, you refuse to be readable as well as to be predictable. You became a whole new category, something that cannot be evaluated by conventional measures, something that cannot be reassuringly classified as talented, gifted, or lucky, something whose choices come from a deeper system that doesn't depend on approval, validation, or outside stability. You turned into an unmapped mind. and he is aware that such minds are rare. When they do, they upend infrastructures, industries, and ideologies. They revise presumpts, Silblan and the Brablanche. They change evolutionary paths because they are forced to function differently, not because they are attempting to dominate. Not only did your move reveal your ability, but it also revealed your orientation, the direction of your thoughts, and the speed at which you move. He became aware that you are accelerating while the rest of the room is maintaining in the instant between his inhalation and the perspiration starting to form on his palms. While everyone else is repeating themselves, you are innovating. While everyone else is responding to surface-level impulses, you are picking up on subtleties. Additionally, when a genius notices acceleration in someone else, especially someone they didn't anticipate, they experience a feeling they seldom acknowledge: fear, in the sense that your presence undermines their hierarchy, rather than in the sense that you will attack them. Being the pinnacle of cognition is how geniuses construct their inner worlds. Being the most competent, perceptive, and unpredictably brilliant is how they define themselves. However, there is a gap in their certainty when someone like you appears, someone who doesn't pursue the throne, doesn't declare their rise, and doesn't show off their intelligence. Because loud minds with ostentatious talent are not nearly as dangerous as quiet minds with precise execution. Now he's stuck in a never-ending cycle of questions. How far can they go if they can do that now? What would a complete display look like if this was a controlled demonstration? What else have they been concealing? What else am I missing? The question that sits like a stone in his stomach is the worst of all. How long have they been ahead without me realizing it? Because the implication, not your move, is what scares him. The implication is that your ability was not accidental, sudden, or spontaneous. It was grown, it was intentional, it was unavoidable. And if this is your inevitable, if it's just the revelation of one ability, then he has to face the horrifying reality that his world map is not complete without you. Predictions are now distorted by your presence. Now, your ability is an anomaly that disproves presumptions. It is now impossible to undo the phenomenon of your evolution. They are no longer able to downgrade you. They are unable to make you smaller in their thoughts. After what they witnessed, they are unable to act as though you are innocuous. Because the question now isn't whether you're capable, but rather how much of it you've decided to keep hidden. Now he's considering that, flipping it over, testing it, and coming up with no satisfactory solution. And everyone in the room senses it, the change in pressure, the dynamic, and the unspoken realization that you are no longer in the same psychological category. You are no longer among them. You are something lateral, something parallel, something changing in a way that renders their framework obsolete. For this reason, fear and respect are frequently combined. Not because those in positions of authority respect authority, but rather because they are able to identify when an individual has transcended an imperceptible boundary beyond which the rules no longer apply. And you, without alerting them, without requesting permission, and without declaring your intention, you crossed that threshold. You crystallized into power rather than stepping into it. And deep down, he knows that this move, this initial disclosure, won't be your last. That there is no leveling out of your trajectory. That you are not slowing down in your evolution. That your silence was incubation rather than emptiness. He now has to prepare for the next shockwave, the next revelation, the next time you make everyone in the room rethink what they think is possible. You came to outgrow their entire metric system, not to match their intelligence. And that realization strikes him with a kind of subdued violence that erupts beneath the surface of his calm, like a repressed explosion rather than appearing on his face. Because true geniuses, those who function on the highest levels of cognition, do not fear competition. They have no fear of genius. They don't worry about someone striking them once. They are afraid of the emergence of an unquantifiable mind. A mind that moves in disruptive leaps rather than straight lines. A mind that develops silently as a result of existing differently from the rest of the psychological ecosystem, not for praise or approval. And that mind is you. It feels like a recalibration every second after your move. He keeps replaying the scene, searching for the weakness, the opening, the calculation error that could account for your precise timing, the unnatural clarity of your instinct, and the way your execution turned out to be a mathematical inevitability rather than a risky choice. However, he consistently comes to the same conclusion, regardless of how he analyzes it or how many perspectives he imagines. Your action wasn't just skilled, it was architected. It was constructed on levels he had never seen you reveal. A typical person wouldn't do that unless they had a cognitive blueprint that fell outside of the range he is accustomed to. Because of this, he said in a whisper, "That's not a human skill." Not in a dramatic or theatrical manner, but rather as if he were reporting the real-time discovery of a new species. He was acknowledging that his knowledge of humanity was lacking, not accusing you of being inhuman. That still hasn't caught up with the room. They're still whispering about the timing, the accuracy, and the result as they respond to the shockwave. They are still attempting to portray your action as the result of good fortune, instinct, or an epiphany. However, he is more knowledgeable. He saw a signal in the way you moved, the signal of someone who acts out of inevitability rather than impulse. Someone who knows the outcome and doesn't compute the risk. Someone whose mind has already finished the pattern while others are still figuring out the first step, so they don't hesitate. People like him are aware of how dangerous and uncommon that is. Because the world is designed to contain outliers, not to accommodate them. The world observes minds like yours rather than rewarding them. And now he's terribly uncomfortably aware that he misinterpreted you in every way. He categorized you as calm, harmless, and unassuming, believing that your silence was more like a stuck engine than a rocket getting ready to take off. However, he can now plainly see that the silence was condensation prior to the storm, rather than empty. A storm that caught him off guard. He didn't believe you could create such a storm. He was left standing in the rubble of his own presumptions when a hurricane just tore through his frameworks. You didn't make an announcement. You let the effect speak for itself. Additionally, the impact talked in a language that the other people in the room do not yet understand. However, he does. It stated, "This person is not using the same operating system as the rest of you. This person sees trajectories, not steps. This person processes consequences before actions. This person is thinking at a speed your instincts can't detect." And he can't express how terrified he is by that. Because geniuses exhibit refinement rather than fear. They exhibit interest. They exhibit disengagement. However, their nature betrays them before their brain catches up when the wrong kind of thought enters their field. Wrong meaning, unpredictable, unexplored, and unfettered. The chilly sweat wasn't an error. Rather, it was a warning from his subconscious. A message that predates language, reason, and the frameworks he employs to maintain control over the global power structures. The message was straightforward. This one is not competition, we're prey. Deviation like this one is disruptive. This is the part, though, for which nobody is ready. Not the space, not him, not the technology that has been classifying human behavior like data points for years. You are the exception, not your move. Your action was merely the first indication of a new way of doing things, a model formed by everything they believed would shatter you. Isolation, betrayal, misinterpretation, underestimation are used to calibrate this model. They believed you were being softened, weakened, and taught your boundaries by those things. Rather, they were compelling the change they had no desire to see. They were honing your ability to respond strategically rather than emotionally. Something that moves precisely rather than insecurely. Something that uses internal architecture rather than instinct. Now he understands this, and the realization weighs heavily, like something that cannot be undone. It cannot be unseen. You are not being downgraded. There's no going back to the person he previously believed you to be. In his mind, you have already revised your classification. And what he is seeing now is something he has been trying to predict his entire life, but has never experienced before. He sees an unpredictable intellect, and it's the kind of thinking that makes everything unstable. He is reliving every second that precedes your move, as well as each time you chose to watch rather than take part. Each time you left without standing up for yourself. Every time you allow someone to undervalue you without correcting them. From the perspective of what he just saw, each of those moments now appears differently. They are now indicators of restraint rather than weakness, and the most terrifying kind of power is restraint. Anyone can blow up, anyone can respond. When pressed, anyone can defend them. However, only the most exceptional minds are able to wait. The rarest minds are the only ones who can observe. The ability to measure the battlefield in silence and strike once exactly, once at the ideal moment, is only possessed by the rarest minds. You struck like a person who doesn't waste energy. You struck like someone who creates impact as a result, rather than pursuing it. You came across as someone whose inner world is considerably more expansive, sharper, and sophisticated than those who were evaluating you could possibly understand. Now, when a genius is confronted with that reality, he realizes he has just two options. Either he tries to comprehend you, or he tries to reassert power. Furthermore, he is already aware that the first choice will not work, because dominance is only effective in submissive systems. However, you don't function inside the submission-dominance dichotomy. You don't become subservient or climb to dominance. You sit completely outside of the game. And you were dangerous because of that. You did not battle for position when you performed that maneuver. Rather, you dismantled the idea of position. Instead of attempting to climb the hierarchy, you broke through it with such grace that it collapsed in an attempt to follow you. He now understands that your mind acts more like a disruptor than a rival. A disruptor of presumptions, not of systems. The room suddenly feels tense because of this. I'm afraid of what your presence suggests, not of you, because all of their preconceived notions about human potential must be re-examined if one quiet, underappreciated individual can develop into this kind of cognitive force. And he detests that. He despises being incorrect, not because he despises you. Being correct is the foundation upon which geniuses build their empires. They construct systems based on forecasts, control, and anticipation, and yet here you are, proof that when one underestimates the wrong person, even the most intelligent minds can overlook the most crucial facts. And the dark, anarchic hilarity in it all, he doesn't fear your attack. He fears that you won't. He worries that you don't even perceive him as a threat, or worse, as relevant, because your mind functions at such a low level. He fears that, while he is still attempting to comprehend the first move, you are already planning 10. He fears that what he witnessed was a warning about what you haven't yet disclosed, rather than an indication of what you are capable of. Beneath all of that, beneath the ego, the intellect, and the perseverance, he now respects you, not the flimsy deference people display when they wish to stay out of trouble, not the respect that comes from someone defending their reputation in politics, genuine regard. This type is only seen in anomalies, prodigies, outliers, and phenomena. When a genius recognizes that they are no longer the only person in the room functioning above the typical human range, they exhibit a certain level of respect. But rather than lessening his terror, that respect makes it more acute. Because he is now aware that he is dealing with someone who did not ascend through the ranks, rise via rivalry, or beg for a place at the table. It was evolution, not permission, that brought you here. Through transformation rather than verification, by necessity rather than ambition, and it's becoming more inevitable. He can hear the term accelerating in his head right now, because your move felt like the start of momentum rather than a breakthrough. He wishes he didn't know the reality that every sense in him is telling him. This individual hasn't reached their top yet. This indicates that the following shockwave is on its way. It's almost time for the next evolution, There will soon be another revelation, not because you're attempting to win people over, not because you're attempting to control anyone, not because you're attempting to prove anything, not because you're attempting to try you out your. However, you were designed to change. Furthermore, evolution doesn't seek for permission. It doesn't wait for solace. For those who feel threatened, it doesn't slow down. You didn't come to outsmart him. You emerged from the mental prison he was unaware he was in. And the cold sweat made sense when he realized that your intellect isn't fighting with his, but rather transcending the basic structure that formed his worldview. Fear of all you stand for, not of you. Thus, you don't pose a risk to his security. His certainty is in danger because of you. You are the evolution, not the disruption. He now needs to acknowledge that the person he previously disregarded has evolved into the subject of his current research. He can't afford not to understand you, not because he wants to. The room wasn't the only thing you changed. The hierarchy was altered by you. You didn't merely initiate contact. You said something. You did more. You exposed their boundaries. One thing becomes very evident. As the revelation permeates that strong intellect, the startled chamber, and every person attempting to piece together the scope of what you did, that was not accomplished by human skill. That was not the result of human predictability. That was not the result of human limitation. It was evolution. Precision did. You did.